today, my Lunch and Learn today really is about navigating the research ethics review process here at Georgian College. So some of the key points that I'd like to go over are, why research ethics? Then we're going to look at the different types of approvals that you may need to get, the actual research ethics process from start to finish, and some of the common pitfalls and facts that may be useful to you as you think about and seek to engage in the research ethics approval process. If at any time you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. I don't know if I see hands raised in the Zoom description. So if you do have a question, Mira or Cecilia, if you see a hand raised, please let me know so that I can address that question.
We can absolutely do that.
Thank you so much. So why research ethics? So when most people think of ethics, they think of it as synonymous with moral. So morals where we kind of distinguish between right and wrong. So we have like the golden oath, for example, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. We have the Hippocratic oath, first of all, do no harm. Or we have religious creeds like the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill. So one may be tempted to assume that ethics is no more than common sense, because if we look at these various oaths and creeds, they seem fairly straightforward. However, there are continual ethical disputes and issues in our society. So ethics, therefore, is not as common as we think when it comes to common sense. So what I wanted to kind of start our discussion with today is some studies. Well, I'm going to introduce one study, but this is grounded in many studies that most of you may have heard of before. So some of the well-known studies that help to demonstrate the importance of ethics are the bad blood study, otherwise known as the Tuskegee syphilis study, the Montreal LSD brainwashing study, the Stanford prison experiment. Those are all really well-known studies that have been used to kind of highlight the importance of ethics. The study that I wanted to introduce to you briefly is the controversial gene editing baby study. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of that study before, but I wanted to introduce this to you because this study was conducted relatively recently. So a Chinese researcher announced in 2018 that he had successfully altered the genes of twin girls born in November of that year to prevent them from contracting HIV from their conceiving parents. So in this case, the father is HIV positive and the mother was not. So he successfully altered the genes of the unborn babies. So there was great horror that was generated when he announced this, and he announced it at a conference, and there was a provincial government investigation. So what they found when they investigated this research, they found that, I have some feedback. Okay, I don't think we have it anymore. Thank you so much. We found that the ethical review papers that the researcher produced, they were actually forged. The researcher deliberately evaded supervision. He used technology of uncertain safety and effectiveness. He also worked with a team of researchers, international researchers, and the researcher was found to be essentially pursuing his own personal fame, and he used a lot of his own self-raised funds for this research. Now, why is this controversial? Why is gene editing controversial? What are your thoughts? Does everybody understand what gene editing is?
I guess I thought this was controversial largely because it was carried out on human subjects
Yes.
in an uncontrolled environment.
Yes.
Gene editing happens all the time in in cellular experimentation and so on.
Yes, definitely. So this was, in this particular case, it was considered controversial because it was being conducted on human subjects. Yes, correct. And when it comes to gene editing as it relates to human participants, is actually banned in most countries, including China. So while the bad blood study and the Stanford prison experiments are studies that are quite dated, I wanted to introduce to you a present day study that highlights the importance of ethics, whether it is an ongoing process or otherwise. Another study I wanted to introduce to you is a study that looked at the ethical issue of informed consent. And I chose to utilize this study as an example simply because informed consent is one of the issues that we have at the Georgian College Research Ethics Board that can be quite tricky, and researchers are not quite sure how to navigate it. In this particular case, this study looked at the ethical issues of informed consent as it relates to malaria studies. And it looked at informed consent for various proposals that researchers would have submitted. So what the study found was that 2/3 of the applicants needed to improve their explanation of study procedures to participants. They also found that 40% attracted comments on risk and discomfort. So they did not correctly attribute possible risks and discomfort that participants may experience. They didn't highlight clearly vulnerability status and issues around compensation. They found that studies that involved vulnerable populations raised more issue than those that did not. And we also find that at the REB, that if you are studying a vulnerable population, we look more closely at your study than ones that are not inclusive of a vulnerable population, because there's a suggestion that there is increased risk. So let's get into the meat and potatoes. So why research ethics? Why is it important? So ethics lays out what is legitimate and what is not. It looks at moral research procedures. It balances the pursuit of knowledge and the rights of the research participants or others in society. Ethics is a professional obligation. And within this context, the standard has been established by the Tri-Council agency. So the Tri-Council agencies include the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. So these three agencies have designed a Tri-Council policy statement that looks at the ethical conduct for research involving humans. So Georgian College must comply with the TCPS2 in order to be eligible for funding from these tri-council agencies. So this statement, the TCPS statement, has had various evolutions. We're currently at the TCPS 2018, and the three core principles underscored are respect for persons, concern for welfare, and justice. These principles have essentially been developed into 5 additional guiding principles: respect for free and informed consent, respect for vulnerable persons, respect for privacy and confidentiality, respect for justice and inclusiveness, and balancing harm and benefits. So each research project that involves human participants in any way must ensure to follow these guiding principles. So at Georgian College, or in general, research can occur in 2 ways. You can have independent projects or you can have course-based projects. So for independent projects, they can be led by the principal investigator, and it could be based on that investigator's interests or experience or expertise. It could be independent of any coursework or program. The faculty could be the PI, or the PI could actually be a non-faculty member whether it be administrative staff, support staff, or somebody external to the college. Students may be engaged. The level of ethics approval depends on the deemed risk, which is assessed at the REB level. You may also have course-based projects. So the research activity plan is planned by the professor as a course requirement and usually is used to enhance or apply course or programming learning skills. The faculty is seen as the PI for all of the projects in the course. Students conduct research under the guidance of the professor. The professor must follow the course-based GCREB approval process, and specific projects may need full ethics approval based on deemed risk. So these are the two different pathways: independent projects and course-based projects. So I just want to give you a quick example from my perspective of what could fit into each one. So I have supervised independent projects that were not linked to a particular course, but I engaged my students. So I had one project where we were looking at calls to long-term care home facilities. And I utilized the students as part of that project to collect the information about police calls from long-term care facilities. And, at that time, the students signed a confidentiality agreement. They went through vetting by that police service, and they were allowed to go to the police service under the supervision of a researcher, whether it was myself or a researcher that I had as part of my student-based team, and they were collecting information. So this was not directly connected to the course. This was an independent project. No, they were not dealing with human participants. So while I did submit for course-based approval, I didn't need to go through the extended REB approval process because we weren't dealing with human participants. For example, now a course-based project for my research methods course, research methods for policing, quite often my students do some type of project from start to finish, which may involve surveying participants, etc. So this is tied directly to the course. And in this particular case, the students had to go through the REB process. Those of them that chose to do any surveying of whether it's students in the class or students on campus, etc., they had to go through the full REB process. So I just wanted to give you an example of what an independent project may look like and what a course-based project may look like.
Eleanor, could I just make a comment and
Sure.
maybe just open it up a little bit? Because I think some of the questions that we get asked are, these surveys aren't going to be for quote unquote research. I think faculty might not understand the stringency of what is considered, what it needs course-based ethics approval with respect to things like surveys.
Okay, yeah, so I'm going to go into course-based research and a bit more detailed in the presentation for sure. But if anybody does have a question around that, we can certainly address it now. But I definitely am going to talk a little bit more about course-based research and what that may look like.
Great, thanks.
So I just wanted to talk a little bit about required approvals. So there are two types of approvals that may be required if you're thinking about research at Georgian College. So there's the permission for access to resources for research, the RPAR farm, or the research ethics approval. So for the access to resources approval, this is approved by college administrators that enables researchers to access college resources. And this is the approval that you would need to seek if you wish to conduct research involving Georgian College participants, if you wish to use Georgian College's name, or if you plan to use any of Georgian College's facilities or resources, you will need to get this permission. For the research ethics approval, which I'm going to definitely go into in more detail, this is the approval by the Georgian College Research Ethics Board, which allows you to conduct the proposed research activities. So this is done essentially when you are involving human participants recruited from Georgian College, research involving the use of the college's name in a contract bid or proposal, college sponsorship of research through professor classroom release time, sabbaticals or direct funding, researchers accessing college facilities, resources, college employees, machines, and other college services or resources. Data formally collected through whatever means or methods from college students, faculty, administrators, support staff, or other members in the college community. So this list that we've provided is quite comprehensive, and this information is also available on the Georgian College Research Ethics Board website. So I just want to talk a little, very briefly, about permission for access to resources for research and why do you need to seek this permission. So it helps to ensure that the appropriate access to participants and resources is available before you get too far in your planning process. And I chose to include this in the presentation because at the REB, we need you to have this approval before you apply for REB approval, because for us, it doesn't make sense to give approval when you cannot ensure that you have access to the participants that you're looking to assess. So it also verifies that any sponsoring departments at Georgian College are aware of your project, and it prevents conflicting activities at the institutional level. So if this is something that you deem necessary, you need to go onto the Georgian College website and complete the form. And the person that approves this application is either the head of the department that you are looking to conduct that research in, or the manager responsible for the most significant resource in your research study. Okay, so that may be a dean of a campus, or that may be a VP of a particular department. It depends on your research study. So let's get into the research ethics approval process. So the Research Ethics Board reviews the ethical acceptability of all research involving humans conducted within Georgian College's jurisdiction or under the Georgian College's auspices, according to the TCPS2. So everything we do at the REB is grounded in the principles underscored in the TCPS2. So who sits on the REB? So the membership is founded upon the principles that competent research ethics review requires ethics experts, multidisciplinary perspectives, and REB independence. So how is the REB governed? Well, the REB is governed at arm's length from the college. So the board chair presides over the board for a 2-year term, which is renewable no more than one time. And then all of the members sit under the board chair. So the members include subject member expertise as well as external community members. So when is ethics approval required for research being done by students? Research involving human participants planned by Georgian College and the Georgian College University Partnership Center students is done when the intent of the research is to educate students on research processes used to explore expanding theories on conceptual knowledge. So this is really, really important. Before, this wasn't laid out in its entirety with the TCPS2, but now it is. If you are teaching students research methods and you're conducting research as a method of teaching them research methods, it falls under the remit of the TCPS2. So you need to ensure that if you're involving human participants, you get REB approval. So this also happens, students may be comparing new techniques, practices, programs with standard approaches to determine which is more effective. The results or findings are written in a format that could be acceptable for a research journal or academic conference or presentation. The primary data are collected and organized for analysis and distribution or dissemination. Okay, so I wanted to be very clear about when ethics approval is not required. If the project is deemed to be quality assurance or quality improvement studies, if it's deemed to be program evaluation activities or performance review or testing, um, so things like KPI satisfaction surveys, event feedback, some types of marketing research, but not all, these do not require ethics approval. Research about a living individual involved in the public area or about an artist based exclusively on publicly available information does not require ethics approval. Research involving observations of people in the public in which individuals are targeted for observations but have no reasonable expectation of privacy. So things like if you're sitting in the if there were no COVID. If you were sitting in the food court of the mall and you were observing people who were in the mall, for example, this does not require ethics approval. Okay. Some other types of research that may not, or activities that may not require ethics approval, the use of information to provide advice, diagnosis, identification of appropriate interventions, or general advice for clients. This does not require ethics approval. Developing skills which are considered standard practice within a profession. This does not require ethics approval. Collecting information as a part of the normal relationship between the student and a participant. This does not require ethics approval. Teaching about a design, conduct, or process of research using fictional practice data does not require ethics approval. So I hope I've kind of been clear about what requires ethics approval and what does not. How can I tell whether or not ethics approval is required? So we have a tool called the RECI ethics screening tool that has been useful for some researchers to kind of determine whether they need ethics review or not. The issue with using this tool is that you need to have a clear understanding of what you're doing to be certain that the tool is assessing your research correctly. If at any point in time after completing this tool, you're still unsure whether you need ethics review or not, do not hesitate to contact us because we can review some information about your study. It's probably best to have it in something like a brief research proposal or a brief research outline so that we're clear about what you're studying for us to be able to ascertain whether you need ethics review or not. So at the Research Ethics Board, we have a proportionate approach to ethics review. So when it comes to, we distinguished it between independent research projects and course-based projects. So we can have a full REB review where the entire board sits and review the project, or we can have a delegated review. And the delegated review may be myself as the chair and one other person, or myself and one or two other persons as a delegated review. And the proportionate approach to the review is based on the level of risk. So if it's anything above minimal risk or risk that is generally expected from their everyday duties or everyday job, then it goes to the full board. And unfortunately, in this time of the pandemic, because of the cascading fallout from the stress of living through a pandemic, most of the research done at this time that involves participants, especially about asking them about their feelings about a particular topic, etc., will go to the full board. Okay. So when it comes to course-based projects, I wanted to just take a quick stop here. When it comes to course-based projects, the instructor fills out a course-based application, and in that application, they indicate to us what type of research they may be looking to do, who they may be looking to include in that research, and it speaks in general across the entire class. So we get an idea of what the entire class may be looking at. And this does not then say that each group in class can't do something a little different. Once they can do something a little different, once it fits within the guidelines that have been put forward to the REB and have been approved to the REB. Because the course-based approach is where the REB gives the instructor the possibility and the authority to review the research ethics implications and acceptability of course-based projects, and should they be above minimal risk, they would then be sent to the board for further review. So that's how the course-based project works. Any questions about that? Okay, so I wanted to be clear about minimal risk research. So what is minimal risk research? So research in which and this is taken straight from the TCPS too. So research in which the probability and magnitude of possible harm implied by participation in research are no greater than those encountered by participants in those aspects of their everyday life that relate to the research. So this is what minimal risk research is. So research participants can be drawn from the general adult population capable of giving free and informed consent and may not include vulnerable people. So we give you examples of who may be part of a vulnerable population: children, persons not legally competent to consent. They're all considered part of the vulnerable population. So this group are considered participants who are capable to be part of a minimal risk research project. If there are questionable questions, I know, sounds a little strange, so it does not involve any personal, sensitive, or incriminating topics or questions that would place the participant at risk. So if you're conducting a survey, if you have any of those questions included, because you may think, okay, my research is minimal risk because my participants are, general population, they're able to give free and informed consent, and I don't have any subset of the vulnerable population. But from the time you have questions that may be personal, sensitive, or incriminating, it increases the risk of your research. If it manipulates the behavior of participants beyond the normal range of classroom activity and daily life, it increases the risk of your research. If it involves physically invasive contact, it increases the risk of your research. If it involves some level of deception, no matter how small, it increases the level of risk in your research. Okay, so let's go through the process, the research ethics process from start to finish. And please, if you have any questions, make sure to raise your hand and Mira will stop me.
Eleanor, I'm going to stop you now because we have Joanne Companion on the phone who does have a question.
Okay, go right ahead.
Hi, Eleanor. Thank you. This is so informative. I just wondered if you could use the example of an assignment as part of a class that students are interviewing people in the public to get their opinion on, what does it take to be a manager, for example, or something like that. Because the way it's listed, it sort of feels like they're interviewing people who work within Georgian or belong to the Georgian community. And these are people outside that community. That's where my question is.
Okay, so Joanne, I'm going to ask you just a little bit more just to get it. So this is where trying to determine the ethics gets a little complicated. I need to understand the purpose of interviewing the individual. Is it more than one individual? What results, like what information is taken from that interview and then what is done with it?
So one student would interview one person of their choice within the community who has held a manager role. And the purpose of it is for them to reflect on what they've learned and how it applies in real life. And then they would write a report that's shared with me, reflecting on that application.
Okay, so that does not require research ethics board approval based on what you have said to me, because what my understanding is that essentially for let's say you're looking, if you're teaching a course in project management, for example, and the student is interviewing a manager of project management or a manager of project
Yes.
managers to understand a little bit more about the field that they may be working in the future, and how what they've learned in the class is directly related to that person's role and their success in the role, and therefore writing a report on it, right? That does
Yes.
not require research ethics board approval.
Interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
I think that's it at the moment.
Okay, and I wanted to say, Joanne, previously we would have asked that everybody kind of come through the REB to ensure that, you know, maybe in that case previously we have said maybe you should get course-based approval, but we've had a sit down as a team, as a board of members, and thought about the actual intent of the interview, the intent of the assignment, and looked at it through the TCPS2 lens to recognize that within the confines of the assignment as it has been set up by the instructors, at this time, it is extremely minimal risk, and it's not necessarily considered research under the auspices of the TCPS2, and therefore it's exempt. So that's why we have taken that approach, just to kind of underscore where we're coming from.
Interesting. May I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
If they were going to share that, like say they presented back to the group of the class what they learned, would that change the ruling?
No, it would not.
Okay.
Okay, so I just wanted to take you through the steps of the ethics approval process. The one thing I really wanted to underscore is that the ethics approve process, it takes time. So I need possible and future researchers to kind of understand what could be the possible timeline and recognize that this really and truly is almost an optimal timeline for ethics approval. Some people may be faster, some people may be slower, but it all depends on your research project and the information you've provided for us, because we look at the ethical acceptability based on what you've given us. So the first step is to prepare. So you're going to plan your research, you're going to complete your TCPS2 course certificate. This is a certificate that doesn't need to be completed more than once. So if you've done it previously, you're fine. You can always go onto the website and sign in with your previous login and download the certificate if you've lost it. The only time that we may require a new certificate is if the policies change and they've indicated that there's some change in the testing, and therefore new researchers need to complete the new tests. But at this stage, if you've completed it previously, there's always a record of it and you can get your certificate at any time, but it is required. The next step then is to read the applicable policies, become familiar with related privacy legislation, and obtain permission for access to resources. So this is the REPAR. Okay, so I'm asking you to allow for 2 to 3 weeks for that process. The second step is to obtain ethics approval. So you're going to complete the appropriate application form for the GCREB website. So if you are looking for course-based approval, there's one form for that. If it's an independent project, there's a separate form. You're going to submit your application with all attachments to the reb@georgiancollege.ca and submit any requested revisions to the GCREB. Okay, so this process can take anywhere from 3 to 8 weeks, depending, and this depends also on the researcher. So we're going to give you feedback. However long you take to process that feedback and make any changes, etc., and respond to us really indicates how long this entire time is going to take. So this time can be short or this time can be lengthy. And it also depends on the number of changes and the number of issues that we've highlighted after that review. So during this time, while you're waiting for ethics approval, no recruitment or data collection should be conducted. You need to have your approval first, or exemption before you can start your data collection or recruitment process. Your third step is the ongoing ethics review. So part of the TCPS2 highlights the fact that while you get ethics approval based on your research, your ethics application, there's the concept that this ethics review is ongoing. So for the length of your study, you must adhere to the agreement that your approval has been based on. So you are expected to report any changes or adverse effects to the GCREB immediately. So say, for example, you're conducting a study and you're hoping to have 100 participants, but based on the original approved study, you were only able to get 50 participants, and you wanted to make some changes. So maybe before you were recruiting in the classroom, and now you would like to do posts on the GCSA website or on bulletin boards, etc., you would need to submit a change request to actually change the information that you submitted in the original application to indicate you'd like to do this because you're having trouble meeting the original sample size that you wanted to, right? And if at any time you realize that your study is going to go longer than you anticipated, you can also apply for renewal, but you need to do it at least a month before the approval expires. The fourth step is closing the file. So you need to submit a GCREB final report for each project. So whether this is a class-based project or whether this is an independent project, you need to submit a final report. So instructors with course-based ethics authority must also submit a summary of course-based research form. Part B, about all of the projects conducted within the course, and we're normally requesting that that be done within 2 weeks of the final grade entry for the course. Okay, so if you look at the time frame from start to finish for the entire process, it varies based on your estimation for how long your research is going to take. So if, for example, you feel your research is going to take 3 months, I would suggest that you apply for Research Ethics Board approval at least 2 to 3 months ahead of the time that you intend to start your research study. Any questions?
Nothing for the moment.
Okay. So I just wanted to go over the course-based research project process a little bit more. So all students are conducting research involving humans as defined by the TCPS2. And that means that they must complete their certificate. So if you've gotten course-based approval, for myself, I have course-based approval, and all of my students are going to be involved in some type of research. Some of my students have decided that they would like to survey other students, whether in their class or outside of their class, about whatever their research theme is. All of my students will complete the very basic requirement is to complete the TCPS2 course certificate, and I make it part of their grade. So the completion of the certificate within a certain time frame, they get 2.5% is an example. However, only the students who will be interacting on some level or another, whether it's online or not, with human participants would need to submit an REB application to me as the professor, and I then will assess the level of risk, and should it be any higher than minimal risk, I will then send it on to the REB for assessment. So that is how the course-based research project goes. Please also remember that for course-based projects, you still need to get your RPAR. Okay, so if the students are surveying other students or staff or faculty, etc., they still need to get that RPAR. And you can have the students fill it out, or you can fill it out. But you, as the PI for that class, you will need to sign off. Okay. So once that is done and the research has been conducted, there needs to be a final report that indicates, did the research go as planned? Were there any changes? Were there any challenges? Were there any adverse outcomes? No, everything went well. The students successfully conducted their research. Here are the general findings, 2 points, and that is it. So the course-based process can be as easy and as simple as you would like it to be, or as complex as you would like it to be. And at any time, if you think that this is an avenue that you would like to utilize, please reach out to us and we can tell you how it can be done. I love the course-based research process. It allows me to get my students actively involved in real-world scenarios and real-world research, but it also allows me to pursue my own research activity. So that it's something that I generally promote to other researchers. Any questions about the course-based process? Okay, so Georgian College has a number of policies. These are all available online, and they're policies that we ask that you take an opportunity to review briefly. So whether it's around research integrity, whether it's around responsible practice and the ethics review and research, or whether it's around access to Georgian College resources for research. All of these policies help to inform how you move forward as a researcher on the Georgian College campus. What is considered responsible practice and ethical practice as a researcher on the Georgian College campus. And these have been set in place to ensure that we proceed in a very transparent and a very rigorous way when we conduct our research on the Georgian College campus. So here are some other resources that you can check out. So we have the website that has lots of information on there, including lots of forms. You can also go directly to the Tri-Council policy statement and review anything that you may be worried about as it relates to your research. The course itself, you can go on there and you can do it. I actually put the link in my classroom for my students to do. I wanted to just take a few minutes and then we can go to questions to talk about some common pitfalls that we've seen as we've reviewed application over the years for the REB. I've been on the REB now just over 5 years, and I've been in a number of different roles. And so there's some things we keep seeing over and over again. So one of the common pitfalls that we see is that researchers provide too much extraneous information instead of the information needed to assess the research ethics. So the research ethics form is really clearly delineated. So I want you, when you look to complete your ethics form, for example, when you get to the rationale, which is section 9, when you get to the rationale, what you put in your rationale must be directly related and supportive of your research question. So 9A is your rationale, 9B is your research question, is your hypothesis. So what we would like to see on the REB is, why is your research question important? How is it grounded in future research? And therefore, how does the future research support your hypotheses? So it all ties together. Not so much if you're doing a dissertation or a thesis, all of your rationale for that. We want you to focus solely on the aspects that are relevant to the human research and human participant aspect of your research, so that we can understand how the human participants are impacted by your research. What are you seeking to learn from them, and how have you taken into consideration the ethical implications? Another common pitfall is that you're not providing enough information. I know, two very polar opposite things. So sometimes we get pages and pages of information, 7 pages, and other times we get a paragraph. Both of these are not helpful. Okay, so we need to have enough information to properly assess the importance of your study and to properly understand why you're asking participants to be part of your study. So Don't give us too much. Don't give us too little. Too much is 7 pages, too little is a paragraph. A page and a half, depending on your research question and your hypotheses, may be good. So some facts. What other research approvals may be needed? It depends on your research location. It depends on your sponsors and your institutions. They may have their own requirements. So it depends on the scope of your research. So if you're doing multi-site project, whether it's different campuses on Georgian College, or whether it's different colleges, or whether it's different institutions, it all depends on that. So it's really important that you look at their requirements and make sure that you get those approvals ahead of time. If it means that, for example, you're looking at research across different colleges, I would suggest that you complete the multi-site ethics review form. And what happens is they look closely at your research, and they give you a supporting letter that you can take to all of the sites that you will be using, all the college sites. And then at that level, they determine, okay, well, can we, because this has been fast tracked, we can do a delegated review, or if the risk is actually quite significant, it may still go to full board review. But anytime you're doing research at more than one college, we ask that you go through the multi-college ethics review process. It speeds up the process much faster. When should I apply for research ethics approval? I recommend that you apply at least 2 months before you plan to commence your research. For you at this stage, your focus, your theme, your research question is still quite vague, I would say apply 3 months before, because the process of review may help to fine tune your direction. What format should I use for my application? Maybe you can email Word or PDF documents, not scanned images. At this stage, because we're online, you can scan or attach a digital signature for sure to your documents. Okay, if you have any questions, I would say now is the time. I could give you more examples of how I've done research in the past in my classroom or outside of the classroom. But really, I'm here to help you kind of understand, if you have possible projects, how you would start the process of research ethics approval.
So before there are questions, I've just been scanning the chat, Eleanor, and no specific questions here, but there was a comment at the time from Leslie that the time frame presented is very helpful. So I think having people understand, the lengthy process is a very helpful thing to hear.
Okay.
Lynn has a question. I have a question about data privacy. I have found the AD0004 policy. What are your data storage recommendations?
Okay, so this is a really good question. So I thank you so much for answering it. Before we went into this whole pandemic scenario, the government was looking at creating a data management policy. I think that's kind of been put on the back burner. However, all of the REBs around the country have already started to implement the concept of data management, and where we're asking that researchers be very clear about how they're collecting the data, how they're transmitting the data, how they're storing the data, and how they're destroying the data across the length of the data management time frame. So we want researchers to start thinking a little bit about, yes, you're conducting this study and you intend to keep the data for 2 years, or you intend to keep the data for 3 years. Suppose you move on from that institution, or suppose something should happen to you. How are you going to deal with, and how have you documented how that data should be managed? So that's one of the key things that data management policy was supposed to provide with respect to guidelines, but it's something that the REBs have been talking about and starting to ask researchers more questions about. Now I've seemed to have lost my way. What was the question again, Mira?
Hi, it's Lynn. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm asking you, is
Okay, good.
your recommendations for storing data. Let's say a student's collecting data through a research project and analyzing that data maybe at home, because we're all at home. What would the ethics board be looking for in terms of us explaining the answers to those questions? Is a 2-year data storage acceptable? What sort of answers are you looking for to that question?
So Lynn, I think it
Appreciate it.
depends on the type of data. So what type of data might the student be collecting to analyze? Can you give me an example?
Okay, so let's say they're doing a satisfaction data with some product that they've tested, for example.
Okay, so so if they're doing a satisfaction survey as an example, what we'd like to see is, if they, more than likely they're doing an online satisfaction survey, we'd like to see how they are downloading the responses from the survey website. So whether it's SurveyMonkey, etc., we'd like to see how they're downloading it. Another thing we would like to see is that in the consent, they identify whether their survey platform is storing its information in Canada or outside of Canada. It's not a huge deal, but it's really important to inform your participants where the information is being stored. We'd like to see that. We'd like to see how they're taking the information, transmitting the information, or downloading the information from the platform. And then we'd like to see how they're storing it. So recommendations with respect to storing is to encrypt the file. So say, for example, I'm downloading my information from SurveyMonkey and it downloads it in an Excel file. Microsoft Excel has built-in encryption. So you can encrypt that file and put a password on it. So you can, while you're working on it, that's fine. But from the time you're going to save it, re-encrypt it and save it. So that's the kind of protection that we want to see. The protection doesn't need to get complicated. You don't need to purchase encryption software, etc., because the encryption software on the Microsoft Office suite, all of their products, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, they all have encryption protocol, and it's significant and it's sufficient enough at the REB, for the REB, to secure your data that way. We also want to ensure that, say, for example, that student is sending you the data for you to see, and maybe you want to check to make sure that however they're analyzing or whatever charts they've generated, they've actually generated it from the data, that they encrypt that file first before they send it to you. And the encryption could be on the Excel encryption, or it could be an Outlook encryption. But we just want to make sure that however that data is passing from person to person, it is being done in a secure fashion. So then when it comes to, and stored in a secure fashion. So when it comes to storing, you could store it on a jump drive and encrypt the jump drive. At this stage, it may not be paper. If it was paper, it's perfectly fine to store the paper in a fire saved filing cabinet. I have a 2-drawer one over here, and keep it locked. You can keep it locked in an office if you have an office. I don't have an office. This is just a corner of my living room. So I have the fire saved filing cabinet that I can keep secure if it's paper based. If it is digital, I would suggest keeping it on an encrypted jump drive, and in fact keeping 2 encrypted jump drives in case something happens to one. This is what we'd like to see on the REB, that you're keeping the data secure, and you're also keeping the data separate from the content information. So if you, for example, if any part of the content information is identifiable in any way, we are expecting that you're going to store that securely and separate from the research data. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Eleanor.
Okay.
So Eleanor, there is one more other question. Sean, who may still be on the call or not, I know he had to drop for another meeting, but he did ask, how do you access the Areki tool?
So if you go on the Georgian College website, we actually have a link right to the Iraqi tool.
Perfect. So it's on the Georgian College. You go to navigate to the REB,
REB website, yeah.
and then
It's
the
right on.
right there. Perfect. Any other questions? Oh, Sean was there for the answer. I think there are no other questions that are popping up. I'm seeing no other hands. Any other last questions? No. Well, wonderful. Thank you. I know it's nearing on 1 o'clock. I'd like to thank Eleanor very much for this, for your presentation. I'll come back on screen for this. I'd like to thank you, Eleanor, for this. I think this is a incredibly important thing at the college and for research. You know, maintaining high research ethics is paramount, and understanding how research is more than just, sticking people with needles, but also what involves human is more than just that, is a broader definition, and how it ties into the courses and course activities is incredibly important to understand. So thank you very much, Eleanor.
You're very welcome. And I just like to say before we sign off that, if at any point in the process you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Either myself or Mary will assist you through the process.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.